Good afternoon. This is a City of Largo City Commission work session. We do have the Finance Advisory Board with us today because this is a special work session concerning the budget for fiscal year 2021. So we're happy to have them with us today. This is a Zoom meeting, so it's a digital meeting. We're not in person, but we're all on this platform. So we're going to get right to it, and I'm going to start with some opening remarks about the budget. I will say that reading through the budget, I was so pleased with the format. I know that we'll probably talk more about that today, but there's been a lot of changes with how we're able to put together the budget, and I hope to hear a little bit more about how that worked this year. But I think it was a great investment, and I'm really happy with the initial product from this change. So I think Mr. Schubert would like to talk to us a little bit about the budget to start out, and then we'll get started.
Hey, thank you very much. And first of all, I want to thank all of you for devoting this afternoon to what's one of the most important issues you deal with every year, which is the review and ultimate adoption of an annual budget. I'm going to keep my remarks very brief. We're going to get some very in-depth presentations by our OPB staff, and then all of our departments will be represented to answer questions regarding their specific budgets. It goes without saying that this budget was developed under considerable uncertainty regarding both our current and future revenues as a result of the COVID pandemic. It's twofold. We still don't fully understand the impact that we're incurring today because there is a lag in when revenues are collected and then transmitted to us by the state. And then the other issue obviously is how quickly will the economy rebound. So having said that, whatever the budget we're proposing, and that whatever budget is ultimately adopted by the City Commission in October will require a lot of ongoing review and attention throughout the upcoming fiscal year. We will have to remain very nimble and agile to respond to wherever the economy ultimately takes us. In this proposed budget, we looked very, very carefully at operating projects and capital expenditures. Where it made sense to do so, we did defer them to future years. There's many projects and expenditures that are positive, but they can also be put off to a future date. Two of my very highest priorities when developing this budget was we wanted to continue moving forward with the many important initiatives that we have that are guided by our strategic plan. That is extremely important to me, that we continue forward momentum on all of those projects. And again, we'll have more discussion on those as we go through the budget review. I also think it's very important to take care of our existing staff. It's important that we are positioned to be able to attract and retain high quality employees, because that's the only way that we can provide high quality services to our residents. In that vein, the budget does include pay increases for our existing employees. However, the only additional employees included in this budget are 3 police officer positions that are funded for 6 months beginning in April of next year. And those 3 positions are represent a continued implementation of our public safety staffing plan. And then finally, later on this afternoon, we'll get into a more detailed discussion regarding revenues. And at that time, we will discuss somewhat the property tax. I did make a recommendation in the proposed budget. And I think after additional thought on that, I have perhaps a new recommendation regarding that tax rate. So again, we'll get into that later this afternoon. So that concludes my remarks. And now I believe we'll, I guess who are we turning it over to now? Is it going to you, Meredy?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, very good.
Good afternoon to the City Commission and members of the Finance Advisory Board. This is, my favorite time of the year. I say it every year, is the budget work session. For the last few years, we've started a tradition. We start off with a video that celebrates our accomplishments and talks about some of the investments that you'll hear about later on this afternoon. So first, before we get that started, I just want to say thank you to the communications and engagement team, particularly Brandon and Preston, who pulled off this video in a record number of days, and all the team members who sent in their videos and were able to make a COVID-19 style remote video production for the budget work session today. So without any further introduction, I will turn it over to Brandon, who can start the video.
We are tremendously grateful to all the individuals that serve the residents of Largo as we work together to keep our community safe and healthy. In the city of Largo, team members are working to sustain city services, including the essential role of public safety services in police, fire, and community development. Staff in public works continue to maintain solid waste collections, streets and stormwater services, while staff in fleet and facilities are working to keep our vehicles on the road and maintaining a safe workplace for others. Individuals in the Environmental Services Department are on site supporting our wastewater treatment facility and ensuring the safety of our reclaimed water systems. Park staff continue to keep our green spaces beautiful for people to enjoy and take a break. We know our team members are what makes Largo the community of choice in Tampa Bay. Thank you, Team Largo, for continuing to provide superior service to the city of Largo and truly inspiring community pride.
While there's no doubt that 2020 has been a unique year, the city of Largo has continued its commitment to focus on sustainability, public health and safety, and community pride. Throughout the past year, Largo's been beautifying the community with enhancements to downtown Largo, the Cultural Arts District, and Rosary Road. And as public health has been taking center stage, Largo has increased our safety efforts by adding fire rescue personnel and emergency management technology.
In FY20, the public safety staffing plan called for the addition of 3 paramedics and has helped the fire department by being able to utilize a designated response unit related only to COVID without adversely affecting the level of service to the community.
And our vision for 2021 is as clear and bright as ever. As the Largo community has joined with the entire nation and world enduring the crisis of a pandemic, the city of Largo has continued to adapt and grow as an organization and community. We've been able to maintain current services and engage with the community in new ways through online permitting, minimal touch library checkouts, live streamed entertainment, and virtual public meetings.
The City of Largo's Community Development Building Division has extended its online permitting system to allow contractors to submit for any type of permit. To put that in perspective, this month we did 750 permits, and more than 50% of those permits were online. That's issuing and accepting those applications.
There's a lot going on in downtown Largo. Currently, new enhancements are being made to the area for pedestrian and bicyclists. New sidewalks, streetlights, benches, and bus stops have now been installed along the corridor. There's also 2 mid-block crossings that are currently under construction on West Bay Drive between Seminole and Clearwater Largo Road. There's so much more to come as we head into 2021.
Rosary Road Phase 1, which spans from Pinellas Trail to Missouri Avenue, and Phase 2, which spans from Missouri Avenue to Eagle Lake, is a community street project that focuses on improving multimodal connectivity. Some of the key components for this project are constructing a multimodal trail on one side of the road, several mid-block crossings, and drainage enhancements.
We received and installed our 4 new self-checkout stations. These are extremely easy to use, and you can check everything on your account straight from the self-checkout. You can look at your holds, you can look at what's checked out and what's due. You can also make payments right from the station. So all of these are minimal touch, and they make our patrons feel a lot safer.
And these are only a few examples of how Largo is strategically using our values as a guide as we look forward to 2021. Next year, Largo looks forward to offering an Angel Fund to help relieve the burden of code compliance to our seniors and less fortunate residents. Largo also plans to help nurture families, reduce stress, and encourage outdoor play by offering mobile recreation outreach, replacing aging playgrounds, and rescheduling the Largo Central Park 25th anniversary celebration. Our annual budget is a blueprint for how we fund services and programs necessary to maintain and improve a safe, healthy, and vibrant community. To learn more and participate in Largo's future, please visit largo.com/financial center today.
Looks like Merity may have lost her video, so I'm going to say that was awesome. That was great. And I think she's going to be back on here in just a second. So the next thing on the agenda is introduction of each of us. So we will start with, and I'm not sure if everybody's on the screen in the same way on your screen. So we'll start with the City Commission from seat 1 to seat 6. I'll start since I'm talking right now. I'm Mayor Woody Brown, and we'll start with seat 1. If you could just unmute and introduce yourself.
Commissioner Michael Smith, welcome everybody.
I'm not Commissioner Fenger.
Okay, you can go next though, if you'd like.
All right, I'm Curtis Holmes, seat 3.
Jamie Robinson.
Good afternoon, Vice Mayor Holt, Commission seat number 5.
Good afternoon, John Carroll, seat 6.
Great, and we're gonna see how well the Finance Board can just do it organically. So who would like to introduce themselves?
I'll start. Good afternoon, I'm Carrie Shelby.
Good afternoon, I'm Gay Gentry.
And Roger, you need to unmute yourself so that you can introduce yourself. Probably click on the little, there you go.
Good afternoon, the Brandon Financial Advisory Board.
Thanks for being here.
I'm Valerie Hibbard, and I think I'm the newest member of the Financial Advisory Board.
Well, great to have you, Valerie. So I believe the next item is budget presentations by service area. So I think Will is going to step in now and lead us in that direction.
Yeah, so I'll substitute in here. I think Mary had some technical difficulties, so she'll be rejoining us. We're going to start with our internal service departments. That's administration and the legislative department and finance, HR, IT, and our general operating. So I don't know if we've got finance, HR, and IT on with us here. I believe they'll probably be joining us in just a minute. Here is Merity, our performance budget director, leading the overview of the admin budget.
Okay, thank you for your patience. Zoom frozen. Okay, so good afternoon. I'm so proud to be able to talk about our continued commitment to building a high performance organization. While there's no new specific investments related to HPO and the OPB budget, the commitment is continued to providing several types of training for Team Largo. These trainings are extremely important because they build leadership capacity throughout our organization and are so important to our transformational process. Building off of these trainings, we are working to launch a sustainability and resilience training, and the City Commission and the executive team experienced a version of this annual retreat in January. So we're building a more condensed version of that, And these trainings are really intended to help build capacity in our organization for the type of systems thinking that's required to advance our resilience initiatives that were outlined during the annual retreat. So some of the other things we discussed at the retreat that are funded in 21 related to resilience, phase 1 is a multi-year process to update our Largo environmental action. Phase 1 will consist of facilitated conversations with our community surrounding resilience topics and community. And it'll set forth the foundation for the new plan, which will be continue to be funded and updated over the next several years. Also during FY21, OPB looks forward to launching a series of performance dashboards that will be viewable both internally and externally. Performance data is a key component to building our high performance organization. It tells you if you have the right resources allocated towards the right functions by indicating if we're moving towards our strategic goals. It also puts information in the hands of all of our employees so that decision making can be decentralized, a core component of HPO, and provides a level of transparency that builds trust with our community. When we look forward to several dashboards being going live later on this current fiscal year for library, purchasing, fire rescue department, and the building division. And others will be developed throughout FY21 thanks to an investment included in the budget and a system that will make database connection seamless with this dashboard. So speaking of all of our data and transformations, during the spring of fiscal year 21, we will be going live with Workday, our new enterprise resource planning system funded in the current year budget. That serves as the backbone of our operations. Teams across the city, and especially within internal services, are currently working to build and configure the new system, and in the process, transforming the way we do business. We will see significant changes in FY21 in all of our business processes. And while we make these changes, we're embracing the tenets of HPO to ensure that we are trusting our employees, reducing bureaucracy, and providing access to data to help inform future operational decisions. In many ways, Workday is one huge investment that we're making in our employees. And many of these investments that we were able to make in our employees this year was due to the city manager's decision to invest first in our current employees before adding new employees, like you mentioned earlier. So unfortunately, Susan Sims, our HR director, was unable to be here today to talk more in depth about some of these investments. I'm going to touch on high level a few things under the HR department purview. So the first and the most important investment that we're making in our employees next year is we have a 4% salary increase included for FY21 for non-represented and CWA employees. We also have increases, salary increases included to bring two employee groups up to market rate wages in terms of resetting the pay plan and providing increases for underpaid employees. The first investment.
She's breaking up something fierce. I can barely hear her.
Do I need to stop?
Yeah, there's a problem with your audio, that's all. Meredith, maybe you could pull the speaker a little closer to you.
I muted myself, sorry. The audio is coming in and out, Meredith, just quite a bit.
Okay. I don't know.
Will Parker's on his way to her office to help.
Meredith, try pulling the screen a little closer to you.
It is as close as it gets to my face at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a bad internet connection, unfortunately.
Yeah, Zoom is just not working right now for me. Is it better at this moment? Am I still breaking up?
No, you're not breaking up now.
Okay.
It sounds good now.
All right, so I'm going to start on the fact that we had 4% salary increases included for FY21 for non-represented and CWA employees. We also have increases for two employee groups to bring wages up to market rate in terms of resetting the pay plan and providing increases for the underpaid employees. The first investment is in the non-represented group. We contracted with an HR firm to conduct a comprehensive comp and class analysis, and a more detailed presentation will be provided to the City Commission on Tuesday at the work session. but the FY21 budget does include salary adjustment as well as the newly structured pay plan as a result of that study. The second investment and pay plan changes are associated with the PBA, our police union. This contract is currently in negotiation, but the city manager has funded the most recent salary proposal in the proposed budget. As I'm sure many people are aware, Largo currently has the lowest paid officers in the county and is experiencing recruitment and retention issues as a result. So a few other notable investments that you'll find within the Human Resources Department budget is a 6.5% increase in health insurance rates. This is citywide. This is actually fantastic because our initial projections included a 12% increase for health insurance, and it came in at 6.5%. So that was a bright spot for FY21. And another item included the employee wellness program in HR is funding to enhance mental health services for public safety employees. Recognizing that these employees experience situations and circumstances that require expertise far beyond what's provided in the city's traditional EAP, we can look forward to staff in the police department, fire, and human resources collaborating to ensure that mental health issues for public safety are addressed and our employees are cared for. Then the final investment to talk about in terms of human resources is really the way that our employees will interact with HR as a result of Workday. So most notably, you'll be able to interact differently with human resources through an online portal so that all transactions that are currently manual, in-person, or paper can now be done online and through an app. So there's a lot going on in terms of investments in our employees and transforming the way we engage and do business with our employees as well. So if there's no questions, I'm going to turn it over to Kim Adams, who's going to talk about finance and probably a little bit more about Workday as well.
Thank you. Any questions for Meredith before we? Doesn't look like there are any. Mr. Adams.
Oh, Commissioner Smith.
Can you just explain a little bit or someone about the mental health service program? What is that and what will that include?
That is a great question to ask the police chief when he talks about it more in depth in a little bit.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? I'm gonna try to keep this quick. I've got several items on the agenda. Workday, sustainability, real briefly on the next rate increase for sewer and stormwater. So I do want to talk a little bit about Workday. We finally realized why they call it Workday, because it's a lot of work. We've had dozens of sessions with the vendor. I am not kidding, thousands of staff hours in meetings, making sure everything will be configured correctly, reviewing all of our business processes, making changes where it's more efficient, and then trying to make sure we get off on the right foot. We know it won't be perfect when we launch next year, but we want to make every effort to make sure everything's in order. A real big shout out to Assistant Finance Director Rebecca Spooler. She has been just amazing in getting into, she's into so many aspects of the Workday implementation, and she's doing such a great job. A lot of input. She's really gonna make sure this thing starts off on the right foot. So we're excited. We're excited. This time next year, we'll have a whole new system, a lot more capabilities, should improve efficiency. As Meredith said, trying to eliminate some of the red tape, get things done a little quicker, more efficiently, still correctly. You know, you still have to do things correctly. But definitely there's some efficiency improvements within Workday that we'll be talking about, I'm sure, this time next year. A little bit on sustainability. Several things are helping the city right now face the COVID epidemic. I want to talk about fund balance. The City Commission really did a great job in establishing a fund balance policy a couple years ago. And not only establishing the policy, I mean, establishing a policy is good, but the commission also was committed to achieving the policy direction. So we started this year, this fiscal year, with a very healthy fund balance in most of our funds. And a fund balance is like a savings account, and it just gives us a little bit of cushion to help with revenue declines that we are experiencing. As Mr. Schubert mentioned initially, it's still too early to tell the ultimate effects of COVID. We are seeing some revenues declining, but right now we don't know how they'll bounce back. We don't know what the end result is. But because we started the year off with a very strong fund balance in most funds, that's going to help us weather this storm. So that's one thing. The other thing is we started the year in very good shape. Our revenues were equal to or above what we expected for the first quarter of the year, and even a little bit more. So that's going to help a tremendous amount, give us a little bit more cushion. I'd like to talk about debt just real quickly. Right now, the city has no general government debt. The debt that we incurred about 8-9 years ago for the community center and for the Highland Center is all paid off. Both of those centers are free and clear. So as are all city facilities. I like to tell people, if you drive around Largo and look at our facilities, they're all paid for. The library's paid for, City Hall's paid for. Again, the city has a history of very conservative debt issuance. We issue debt infrequently, and we pay debt off quickly. That is a strength. That helps us sustain the level of financial condition we have. Now, that being said, we don't have any debt right now, but that being said, we did budget to borrow about $3 million to pay for Workday, the ERP system. Merity mentioned earlier the investments that we're making, and we believe Workday is an investment. And so we're going to be bringing the award for the borrowing to the City Commission in a couple weeks. We received a very favorable rate, 1.8% interest rate, which will help lower the cost of paying it back. We're proposing a 5-year borrowing, which again is very conservative. We're not borrowing long-term. It's going to be 5 years paid off, ready to go. So our debt policies have really helped us with sustainability. And then everybody is committed. Everybody in the city is committed to continuing to do a good job, even in the face of adversity. I don't know if anybody's going to mention all the efforts that all the employees have made. I think implementing our high performance organization has given people more say in their work. They're more engaged than they've ever been, and they've always been highly engaged, but we've just kicked it up to the next level. So that is really going to help us going forward in the future. Two more quick things. There is a proposed sewer rate in the 21 budget, 10% increase. There's also a planned 10% increase for the next 2 years. So it would be a 10% increase each year for the next 3 years. Why are we doing that? Well, as the commission knows, right now there's a $50 million sewer project being conducted at the treatment plant that's going to rejuvenate, rehabilitate the whole middle plant part of the project. So we're taking care of our infrastructure. And to do that, we needed to borrow, again, at a very, very low rate, less than 1%. When you add in cost of borrowing, it's probably around 1% interest rate. But that $50 million has to be paid back starting next year. And so we've budgeted a 10% rate increase to help pay those debt service costs, and also to provide coverage ratio as required under the loan agreement. There's also a planned stormwater increase in the next year, 2022. We haven't had a stormwater increase since 2015. And we really, backing up a little bit, we haven't had a sewer rate increase since 2007. So hats off to the Environmental Services Department for really being very efficient, very prudent in how they run our state-of-the-art plant. So that, that is something to be proud of. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Holmes.
Kim, have you had any feedback? I know it's really early, and I know we're always a year behind, but have you had any feedback on the police and fire pension, the rate of return?
Well, if you'd asked me that a couple months ago, I'd have had a different answer. I'm pretty sure that they're tracking close to what their assumption is. Now, again, 2 months ago, things looked pretty bad. As of today, things have popped back up. Now, here we are, in July. What's going to happen in August? What's going to happen in September? We are in a period of heightened volatility, but I do know the Police and Fire Pension Plan has an excellent investment policy. They work hard. I attend most of the pension boards, and I will tell you that that's a hardworking group of people. They pay attention. They ask great questions, not good questions. They ask great questions. And so I'm confident that our investment policy is strong and it should result in good returns over the long run. Again, in the short run, we're facing a lot of volatility, so stay tuned.
Oh yeah, I know. I remember a couple of years ago, we had to pony up, what, $750,000 just to bring it up, to the even keel. I mean, I don't know of any way of avoiding it. Just point of curiosity right now. Thank you.
And as we know, the valuation for the annual report is based on September 30th. So whatever the portfolio is worth on September 30th, that's the magic date.
And I think on that note as well, it's worth noting that the current year, the police fire pension plan did see an increase in about $425,000 in the annual contribution. Luckily that we had planned for most of that in terms of, when we increased benefits for IFF. And we also saw an increase in the state contribution that helps pay for the police fire pension plan. So the net increase that we experienced in the budget in terms of what we planned for versus what is actual was only about $30,000. So that was a really nice relief to first see the sticker shock of the 400-some thousand in the middle of the pandemic and then understand that we planned for that. So that was good news.
Commissioner Carroll.
Yeah, I just was going to take the opportunity. Kim mentioned it once. I'd like to hear it at every opportunity that this commission and city staff has put us in a good position with fund balance and long-range planning and thinking, investment in infrastructure and so forth, low debt, a solid fund balance. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from anybody? All right, we'll move forward.
Okay, I think that's me. I'm Scott Simonis. I'm the Assistant Director for IT. I guess as with most years, the strongest nexus in our budget to the strategic plan is going to be in our efforts to help advance a flexible and resilient organization that delivers superior city services, both from a recruiting and attracting an innovative workforce, but also to providing modern, evolving technology. With that said, the largest thing that you'll see in our budget for this year is close to $1.3 million investment to move everybody in the city over onto a Microsoft singular platform beginning in FY21. It'll probably cover somewhere in 18 months to 24-month period. This is going to put everybody within a Windows operating system. It'll be offering Office 365 for everyone. It includes taking the thin clients that are on most of our desks now and replacing them with either a laptop or a micro PC or something like that, as well as also offering Teams as a collaborative software piece as well. So it's hard to overestimate, the level of work that this is going to be from a citywide standpoint. And along with trying to support the ERP, we're going to be quite busy over the next few years. But there's still a lot of question marks as we move forward because we're trying to work through how to migrate over, systems and things that have been in place for several decades. I think the balance that we've always tried to strike here, at least over the last few years, has been how we balance, cybersecurity with the user experience. And when you look at this project, roughly 30% of this money that we're looking for next year is going to be on our enterprise agreement for the licensing. But it's almost an equal percentage too on the type of security measures that we're trying to put in place to make sure that we're protecting our infrastructure. So I think we've done a good job, in putting this plan together, and I'm excited for the future. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you. Any questions for Scott? Thank you very much. I believe next we have general operating. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I can take that. The general operating really is just where we have all of our debt service payments scheduled, and that's where all the expenses are scheduled. So you may see in some emergency management. So there's really no specific investments, but just if you're looking at the general operating department budget, no, that's just kind of the catch-all for City Hall and other non-specific expenses.
In that case, we'll move forward to fire department.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right. Chad Pittman, the fire chief. Mr. Mayor, city commissioners, and board members, thank you. I have a few highlights of our budget that I'd like to go over real quick. And then at the end, I would do my best to answer any questions that you might have. First of all, the strategic initiative that we have for this year, the 2021 budget year, is we will continue to implement the public safety staffing plan. This is not the addition of personnel. Instead, we'll accomplish this by converting 3 current firefighter EMT positions to the positions of firefighter paramedic. The goal of this staffing plan is to alleviate any potential paramedic shortages and decrease the overtime. The cost of this is approximately $40,000. Regarding some safety initiatives for us this coming year, we're going to be purchasing a firefighter escape device replacement. And what this is, it's about, each firefighter has one of these, and it's equipment that the firefighter wears that enables them to escape from upper floors during a rapid fire event. It's basically a roping system, allows them to go out the window or something to get away from the danger. In 2021, this equipment will be 5 years old and in the need of replacement in accordance with the National Fire Protection Association standards. The cost of replacing this equipment is estimated at $100,000. Another topic is the clean cab retrofits. Firefighters have an increased risk of cancer due to their exposure to carcinogens contained in the smoke when we go out to fight fires. To eliminate some of this risk, Largo Fire Rescue intends to move to a clean cab concept with our apparatus. The clean cab concept, it requires the storage of equipment and gear that contains carcinogens to be stored or located in areas outside the cab of the truck where firefighters ride in. This budget amount will retrofit 2 of our current vehicles to this clean cab concept. And I'd also like to point out that every vehicle that we purchase going forward that we have manufactured will have this concept built into it from the manufacturer. The cost of this is $50,000. Next item is additional firefighter bunker gear. This also relates to reducing the risk of cancer to firefighters. Bunker gear is the protective equipment that we wear while we're inside structure fires. It absorbs dirt and smoke, and both of those contain carcinogens that increase the risk of cancer. So this additional bunker gear will increase the current stock of backup gear, which allows firefighters to, when they get their bunker gear dirty and containing those carcinogens, they're able to go into clean gear. Fire rescue plans on purchasing enough bunker gear over the next 3 years. So every firefighter has 2 sets of gear. This is the industry standard, and the cost of this is $50,000. And I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions for the chief? Commissioner Holmes.
Well, first off, Chief, I haven't figured out if you're standing out in front of Lambeau Field or if you've got truck 42 parked in front of the Clearwater's new station on Court Street. But anyway,
it's parked in front of Lambeau Field. That's what it's built. All our vehicles are built in Appleton, Wisconsin, which is just down the road from the stadium.
So you are in Green Bay then?
I wish, but no, I'm in my office.
All right. Why switch over 3 EMTs to paramedics?
Well, let me first start off by saying the difference in the EMT and the paramedic. The EMT is a more basic position, emergency medical technician, where a paramedic is advanced life support. They're able to administer drugs, treat patients differently in a more advanced manner. So you're getting an advanced firefighter with that paramedic position. So we have this kind of a little joke, but you can't have too many firefighter paramedics. So when you have to have a minimum of 1 paramedic on each truck. So in some cases, when we have call outs or people on vacation, people dealing with COVID during this situation, if we don't have enough paramedics, even if we have enough people on shift, if we don't have the proper amount of paramedics, we still have to call in overtime. So when we have additional paramedics, it's just easier to staff the shift on a daily manner.
So this is really, it's just more training than for three staffers.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Okay.
So
my next
perspective, the EMT is about a semester, and paramedic would be 3 more semesters at a junior college to receive that training.
Okay, well, the next question for you is actually directed to the city manager. Got it down $3.5 million to, I think, to rebuild Station 41 or Station 40.
No.
Chief? Go ahead.
Yeah, Station 41 is our newest station. That's the one downtown. That probably won't be rebuilt for decades.
Maybe it's 30. I think it must be 38 then.
39 is the one that we're focusing on right now, which is the one in the Ridgecrest community.
Ridgecrest. Well, my question is, we've got 3 stations that need to be rebuilt. You've got 39, you got 42, and I think
38.
38. Why don't we go to the federal government and just get $10 million from them and do all 3 of them at one time? I mean, $10 million to the Fed is a rounding error. And I still, I've said this before, I think we ought to just, drive this thing home and put in a request for a federal appropriation. We've been messing around with the state and we're getting nowhere with that. But I think if we go after the state or after the feds, we may have a better chance.
We make continuing efforts to try to secure grant funding from other levels of government, particularly the state, but also the federal government. Those monies are more and more difficult to obtain because of the fiscal challenges they are experiencing themselves.
Yeah, but the feds just print their own, though, as we all know.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question for the chief real quick. It might have already been answered. But the staffing plan change from the EMT to the paramedic, is that existing EMT and existing employees?
That is correct. There's no additional employees with that. It's just a conversion of firefighter EMTs to firefighter paramedics.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
I had a question about the way the clean cab functions. So does that mean that when they're leaving like a structure fire or whatever, they have a place to put their bunker gear and they get in the cab without the bunker gear? Is that correct?
That can be. It depends on how the trucks are configured. But if that bunker gear is dirty, if it's been exposed to a fire, and we think of it as it continues to off gas after the fire, so you could get in the back of a fire truck right now and you can smell smoke. You want to stop that. So to answer your question, if it's dirty gear, it would not be in the front. It would be stored in the back somewhere. So the cost of that is associated with configuring new seats, because right now the air packs are in the seats, and we'd have to have new compartments in the back to hold those air packs and all of the bunker gear. And it goes even farther than that. It could be even like a flashlight or a thermal imaging camera, anything that can have that, any carcinogens on it.
Okay, but leaving the station would essentially be the same though, because it's clean gear, I would assume. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
There could be a scenario where you were going from one call to another and the dirty gear was in the back and you had to stop and put the gear on outside of the cab. But yes, generally speaking, you are correct.
Okay.
Mayor?
Mr. Carroll, go ahead.
That's a question for the chief, but it could be applied to any of the departments and perhaps city admin. In our long-range plans, we always anticipate things. And for example, the public safety staffing plan is a good example of this. What is, Henry, I guess for you or Meredy more than the chief, what do we have in place to ensure that declining service demands during the current situation? I know for the fire, for example, went to a lot less traffic accidents when people weren't driving around. And what do you have in place to make sure this is counted as kind of an outlier year in your long-range planning?
Yeah, we understand that this is a unique experience right now, so that we have to discount those periods where there's some really aberration in the data that's easily explained. And by the way, in the fire service, their calls for service are pretty much back to where they were before the beginning of the pandemic. So it was for like 3 months basically that the calls were down. But
it just occurs to me, year to year, we look at last year's data to make projections for next year and beyond. And I just want to make sure, and I'm sure you do, I just want to say it publicly, that you've got a plan in place to kind of discount what happened during this period of time. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example that we're very data driven, but you can't rely just on the numbers. You also have to know the story behind them. Meredy?
Yeah, I can speak to the financial projection piece just a little bit more, and when Will gets to the point of the financial piece talking about the general fund, I think it's pretty clear when you look at it, but we project about an average of 5% unexpended in the general fund, and we count that towards our available fund balance essentially in our long range financial plans. So this year, I think we saw closer to about 8 or 9% unexpended, particularly because we held off on some large capital and large operating projects. So what we've done, and we'll talk about this more later, is we first reprogrammed everything that was held off, and then we did not change our out years projection for estimated unexpended from the 5%. So we really just took it as a one-time savings in FY20 and used that to help balance out the future years, but we didn't change the way we fundamentally project expenditures at all.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Chief. We're going to move on to the police department. Chief Understead.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jeff Understead, the police chief, Largo Police Department. Some of the things that I want to bring to your attention today would be, Mr. Chu already mentioned, we have the staffing plan. We're in year 4 of year 5, so we'll be adding the 3 additional police officers to the agency, bringing our staffing up to 154 for sworn. The next project we have is a mobile computing project. So The nice thing with this project is we had the opportunity to expand the life of our vehicles to 6 years, increasing our take-home vehicle program. Along with that became the challenge of how do we keep the technology up to date in those vehicles. We were fortunate enough that with staff's help, set aside the $130,000 to replace vehicles that are approximately 3 years old that have older technology in it. We will replace that old technology with a new laptop. So the strategy is when we get a new vehicle, that vehicle would come equipped with a new computer system and camera system. And then at the 3-year mark, that computer system will be replaced through general funding. The next thing we have is police evidence management software. The term of that software, the name is Veripic. That allows officers to go out and take digital photographs of evidence and through cloud storage, upload those photographs to a secured location and be accessed later by property and evidence staff. So again, we've had a fortunate year where we were able to get cell phones in for the officers. So all the officers have smartphones now. So they have the capabilities of collecting this data, both video and pictures, and be able to upload this data into our secured storage facility. The next thing I wanted to mention is we were working with ways to try to reorganize our communications center. Years ago, we had an emergency communications manager for the unit. Through some other budget changes back years ago, that had changed. And currently we are using a police lieutenant to oversee that function. And we found better use for that lieutenant and then asked for an upgrade. We have a current supervisor vacancy that we were going to upgrade to an emergency communications manager to be able to manage that unit rather than having a police lieutenant manage the unit. So that's a huge and significant change on how we want to deploy some of our personnel. Next thing I'd like to talk about is, I think, not to steal too much of Carol's thunder either, she's going to mention it, but we are continuing our partnership with Directions for Living for our mental health program, which is called the ELMS units, Enriching Lives Through Mental Health Services. So we have an officer that is teamed up with a licensed clinician to go out and help serve our community and the folks that are in mental health crisis. We will be bringing this to a work session, I believe, next week. So there'll be more details. Officer Soto and his partner, Tiana, will be providing you all a detailed presentation of their success so far. But that unit and team has been working really hard and doing a wonderful job. Along with that, I just want to throw a plug in there too. We started a homeless outreach team, much similar to the ELMS team. So we have another civilian personnel through Directions, through grant partnership, along with an officer that they as a team will go out and help serve the homeless in our community. That unit actually has only been functioning for about 2 weeks. And I'm proud to announce that the officer just sent an email the other day that they've got about 6 or 7 success stories of folks that they're really getting out there to communicate and help. Obviously, when you get a different officer each time with somebody out there that might be a little apprehensive to receive those services, but getting that partnership with the police officer and the civilian personnel to go out there and help with these folks, I think is really making a huge difference and impact in us being able to reach out to that portion of the community and provide that help. And if I want to jump in, I think Commissioner Smith, you had a question on mental health. Was it related to that or to the employees?
The mental health program services. Can you describe what that is a little bit?
So, yes, sir. I have Lieutenant Lamonaco, who's been very passionate over our employees and the mental health of them. Meredith and her staff were very kind in helping us put together a project team. Gosh, we're probably coming up on a year. I asked for help to redo our strategic plan. And in doing so, Meredith and her staff came out and interviewed over 150 employees in the police department. My goal is to not create a strategic plan that I created with my vision, but to get the input of all the employees of the police department and see what their needs and their vision is and where they see the agency going in the future. So out of those conversations, one of the key things was the health of employees and particularly mental health. So Lieutenant LaMonaco has been working very hard with putting programs together. One of the programs is called the Franciscan Center over in Tampa. It's a 1-week program. It's completely confidential. Only Lieutenant LaMonaco knows who the officers are that are going there. But it's an opportunity for those in need or just having that point in time in their life where they just need that direction on where to go for help. She helps facilitate that to make sure that we're looking out for the officers and making sure that we provide them some services and education and help before they get into a crisis mode. So the goal obviously is to catch things before they get bad, which of course obviously will translate into work performance and other things like that. So if we can maintain a good, healthy workforce, then we can provide superior service to our community. And with that, I will offer up any questions.
Any questions? Commissioner Holmes.
Yes. Merity, this is for you. You said, and I wrote this down when you said it, we have one of the lowest paying police departments in the Bay Area. I have a chart here from, this is the Pinellas Police Standards Council, January of this year. And according to this, we're right in the middle. I don't know, unless this is wrong. It could be, I don't know.
I don't know, I'm sorry.
I will add that some of that data, depending on where contracts lie, that was taken at a point in time. So I wouldn't say with 100% certainty that it's accurate today.
Okay.
I think, yeah, the other issue on that is that the 3 largest employers in the county are Clearwater, St. Petersburg, and the Sheriff's Office. St. Petersburg and Clearwater pay considerably more than we do. The Sheriff's Office is similar to us, but they are also in negotiations, and their goal is to also match St. Petersburg and Clearwater. So there are some of the real small agencies that pay less, but they're some very small agencies.
Well, now you know why we should annex Bel Air Beach, and then we'd have Largo Beach, and we would proceed from there. But anyway, I've got one more question, and you can have at it. Henry, you said we're adding the 3 officers April of 2021, correct?
Correct.
Okay. On page 16, it shows additional police officers, 3 for $441,900. I think that figure should be half that, because you're putting these people on in April, you're not putting them on in October.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the exact number, but when you bring the officers on halfway through the year, you obviously save their salary and benefits for 6 months, which was part of the reason for putting them on 6 months later. But there's considerable other costs that you're going to incur that are the same whenever you bring them on. So the training, the uniforms, all the equipment they have, and all that.
You got a car in there too, and stuff like that. But I'm just saying, if we're not bringing them on until April, I think all total you're spending. I think it averages out at $147,000 per year for a new officer. By the time you count the car and all the ancillary costs, pension costs and insurance, payroll, the whole bit. But if you're not bringing them on until April, you need to cut the personnel portion in half.
Yeah, I know we budget them for 6 months. We can check, and maybe Meredith can add to this, but if is that the annualized cost, or is that the actual cost?
That's the annual cost, and it includes the vehicles as well. So
okay, so the 441 that's a 12-month, not 6.
Yeah, and the budget was adjusted to account for half of the actual cost, but in light of transparency, that's what it costs to add the 3 officers and vehicles.
On an annual basis?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to go back briefly to there was a statement that our officers are paid lower than anybody else in the county, and that's not true. I mean, our officers are paid less than any of the other large agencies in the county, and I'm in full support of bringing us up to par with those other large agencies. But I just wanted to be clear on that, because there's certainly some small police departments that pay a lot less than we do, or pay less than we do.
Sorry, that's what I meant, not the labor.
Yeah, no, that's how I took it, but I just wanted to make that clear. Commissioner Carroll.
Yeah, I just wanted to congratulate the chief and others involved in that initiative on officers' mental health. I mean, that clearly translates to job performance, and people forget that police officers are human beings and they have all the other outside stressors. For years, we've had post-incident, after a shooting, there's mandatory counseling and so forth. But the initiative you're launching there is very timely, and I really appreciate that effort. Thank you, Jeff.
If I may add one more thing, the mayor mentioned too, when it comes to the salary of the officers, is Clearwater is our primary competitor. So obviously the goal would be to keep in line with Clearwater. We have lost a few officers to Clearwater, but they're the closest competitor for us, and much like our agency, they operate the same way. So that's where we stand with keeping up with those folks.
And we don't like losing officers or high school football games to Clearwater, either way.
No, I mean, we spend a lot of time training our folks and getting them ready to serve our community. So we don't want to keep them for 2 years just to have them go to Clearwater for a couple $1,000s more. So
totally agree.
And I think the city manager mentioned, the 6-month funding, we had discussed that. And, I know some folks might think that might have been an issue for the police department, but it is not at all. We're completely comfortable with that it's going to take us probably that 6-month period to go and find the folks to fill those positions. So not funding them for 6 months is the right move.
Time to go annex Bel Air Beach.
Mayor, I have a question.
Mr. Robinson, go ahead.
Thank you. Hey, Chief, in one of the unfunded personnel positions, you have I believe it's your crime analyst.
Yes.
Can you kind of talk about what that position would do, what the benefit for the PD would be, and maybe talk about, the cost of fulfilling that or funding that position?
Certainly. So years ago, we had a crime analyst, and that position was assigned to the Investigative Service Division. Their primary role was uniform crime reporting, the UCR report, along with trying to strategically identify hot spots in the city for detectives and sworn personnel to kind of focus on particular areas where crime might be spiking. That position, again, moving forward, for those that haven't heard, that we're in the midst of discussing with all county law enforcement agencies a unified CAD RMS system that we could all agree on and share data, which would significantly increase service delivery, not only in the city of Largo, but for the county as a whole. And when that project really kind of takes off is when, or slightly before that, when we're implementing that, is when we would love to have a crime analyst to be part of that process as we identify the modules that are attached to that software program to know what we're looking for. Just through some of the demonstrations we've had, the new business analytics that are attached to these programs is amazing. I mean, Chief Carroll from his era would be very impressed from the old pen and paper crime analyst to pushing a button. So just for an example, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, but one of the features a company had was I can create a report and set it up to be auto-generating that would go out to the commission on a weekly basis. So you could see a certain group of stats to say, this is what's going on in the community and how things are interacting with the police department. And you don't have to call them and go, can you guys run this report again? And then staff has to sit and spend 3 hours trying to create a report. The stuff is done automatically and then can be set up to be automatically emailed to folks that are interested in receiving that stuff. So there's a lot of exciting new technology out there that is really going to take us into the future and provides another next level of service for police work.
Okay, and what would the cost of funding that position be? I don't know.
Historically, that's, without adding salary and benefits, I'll let Mary jump in there, but the salary alone is usually between, you know, $65,000 and maybe $75,000 roughly. So then with benefits on top of that, you're a little more than that. So
yeah, I think the annual cost of that, I would slot that at a higher management analyst position, which would probably be with salary and benefits in the range of about $80,000 a year.
That's with benefits, you think?
It's a top of my head estimate, yes.
That's perfect. Thank you. That's all I had for.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Smith.
Chief, I just have a question. More, if you're looking at it with St. Pete creating the Community Assistance Liaison Program, what are your thoughts on that? And is Largo looking at it?
Well, that just popped up yesterday. So to say we're looking at it would be premature. I do think we've already kind of taken some steps prior to that with our mental health and our homeless initiatives. I feel and believe that, you know, looking at that list of some of the calls that a civilian would go on, I think they warrant some type of police presence. Some of these calls could turn violent and often do. So sending an unarmed civilian might be challenging. But I think we have opportunities in the agency, and we've been talking about this, not necessarily related to this, but since COVID kind of struck that pandemic, we've looked at types of service delivery and the calls we are going out on now to see how we can modify that into the future and maybe change some of the ways we deliver service. And this is just another example. We've started this years ago. We probably have some other opportunities to look at what positions might be better suited civilianized and or at least partnered up with a police officer to provide that service to the community and then have the consistency of the same police officer part of that program.
Thank you for keeping an eye on that and evaluating everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Carroll.
I was just going to take the opportunity to maybe say what the chief might not say, and that is I applaud St. Pete's initiative to look at alternatives to service delivery. But I can tell you from experience that oftentimes it's those minor calls, those quality of life type calls that result in someone getting hurt. And we in Largo have for years used VIPs to do things. We have used other civilians, code enforcement to do non-emergency calls. But I'd be very, very careful about some of the stuff I saw on the list. And Chief Holloway is a good friend of mine, and I applaud his efforts, but I would just be very careful with that concept.
Thank you. If there's no other questions, we'll move into community development.
Good afternoon. This is Carol Strickland. I'm the Community Development Director. You're going to hear from me twice under Public Safety as well as under Community Services. So under Public Safety, I will touch on two initiatives. As Chief Understad mentioned, there is a partnership between Community Development and Police for the Mental Health Outreach Partnership, ELMS, and the Homeless Outreach Team. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to stress the successful partnership that exists between not only community development and police for the homeless outreach team, but it really is a citywide approach. We have a homeless task team that's been meeting it's an HPO team. We've got fire, police, public works, library, community development, and community engagement on that team. And they're helping guide the efforts of the homeless outreach team, but also really looking at holistically developing better data about the impact of homelessness on the cost of services, looking at protocols of how city employees can engage when they encounter homeless individuals, and looking at how to mitigate some of the impacts of homelessness on the community. But I think it's really a great example of how we look at services holistically across the organization. The other initiative I wanted to talk about is in the area of our nuisance abatement program. It's our Code Lien Foreclosure program. Earlier this year, we did bring to the City Commission a budget amendment to account for the expenditures that are related to the foreclosure program. We do have an attorney under contract, and as we realize revenues from foreclosure, there are expenses that are generated by that, and payments are made to that attorney. So for next year, we have budgeted $200,000 to account for those expenditures. That only represents a portion of the monies that are recovered, and that is only paid as a result of individual foreclosures. So that is an estimate of what those legal expenditures would be. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Strickland? Doesn't look like there's any concerning this. I guess we'll move on to community services then.
Okay, it's me again.
And welcome back.
Thank you. Well, under community services, we have two initiatives that really relate to the area of sustainability. One is a budget request for $35,000 in continued funding for consulting services. We have two projects that are nearing completion and will move into the implementation phase in fiscal 21. And that is the Gateway Mid-County Master Plan that is a partnership with Ford Pinellas, as well as other cities, the three other cities. And you'll be hearing from them next week at your work session about the completion of that master plan and moving into the implementation phase for that program. And then the cities study, the US 19 Roosevelt Boulevard Special Area Plan, now the Largo Tri-City Plan that you recently heard from at the work session, is nearing completion and moving into the formal adoption phase. We have identified the need for additional services from our consultants to make sure that as we move forward with adoption and then implementation through amendments to the comprehensive plan, amendments to the comprehensive development code, that we have appropriate support for those activities. The second item I wanted to mention that was in the video that you saw is the Angel Fund. That is part of our nuisance abatement program in community standards. We've had a wonderful partnership between community standards and the housing program for many years, where if we find low-income residents who are having difficulty maintaining their properties, their homes need repairs, we have been able to refer them to the homeowner rehabilitation program. However, we have identified that there are individuals that we're not able to assist, either even if they're income eligible, the types of things that are required to bring properties for minor violations into compliance aren't eligible under our home funding. So we're proposing a kind of a pilot program, but $30,000 plus an additional $1,500 for software to manage that, which would be a grant program administered by community standards. And the idea is that we would use those funds as a grant to abate minor nuisances in circumstances where homeowners do not have the means or the ability to correct these minor violations. So rather than going through an enforcement process, bringing people to code board, potentially putting them in the position of being fined due to a financial inability to abate these minor violations, we want to take a different approach and assist people to come into compliance. So that would be a program that we would administer through community standards. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question about a couple questions, but one about the Angel Fund. First off, I think it's a great program. It seems like it'll really help some people out. Have you yet figured out kind of the logistics? Because I'm curious how we will assure that the improvements get done. Will it be paid after the fact? How does that? How is there assurance that the code problems will be taken care of?
We have not fully developed the SOP for that.
Okay.
One approach that we've used, though, is the payments are made on behalf of the homeowner directly to the vendor that corrects the violation. So if it's a minor home repair, the money's provided to the contractor that makes the repair, for example.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Second, I know that in the video earlier, they talked a little bit about half of the permits being online during a given month. So I'd like you to talk just a little bit. We kind of, we've been dipping our toes in the pool for a long time, and 3 months ago we just jumped in. So I'd like to hear a little bit about how online permitting's going as far as from the staff's perspective, and maybe any feedback you are getting from contractors and stuff.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. It really was quite an adventure. Our building division staff has worked incredibly hard to make that happen. We did have a number of permits online prior to that, but they were generally sort of minor permits. When we were forced to move to a different type of operation because of COVID, we opened up additional types of permits. So now contractors can go online, make their applications, submit their plans electronically. At this point, the only type of permits that we're not able to do online are owner builder. So if you're not a registered contractor, individuals, they can still email in, they can still reach us electronically, but they cannot go through our Trackit system. But we are able to accept plans electronically, review those, issue comments, and accept resubmittals, and they issue the permits in a virtual environment. So I'm really, really proud of the progress we've made.
Nice. My last question is concerning, you mentioned the code lien foreclosure program. And I know that a few years back, we started a code lien forgiveness program if a property is sold for residential properties. And so I wanted a little bit of feedback on how that's been working. And I had somebody in a recent coffee chat that I've done ask about why we don't have a similar program for commercial properties that have a code lien. If those properties change hand, if they would be able to apply for a code lien forgiveness.
The code lien forgiveness programs, we actually had 3 for residential. We had one for nonprofit. We had one for new builds where somebody would buy, demolish, and build a new home, and then one for repair. The latter 2 are due for renewal. They did expire, I believe, in March, and we are going to be bringing that back to the City Commission. Right now, we're looking at some changes, hopefully, to make those programs easier to use, but we do intend to bring that back in front of the City Commission to renew those. One of the things we found is some of the timeframes were problematic, maybe a little tight, so we're looking at providing people additional time to make repairs or bring properties into compliance. As far as the commercial properties, that's not been suggested to us, but we'd love to take a look at it. It's a great idea.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, Mayor. I just have a comment. I just wanted to pass on that I've had actually very positive response to our online permitting. People that I know that are contractors have been very impressed with how smoothly it's gone and very happy that somebody said moved into the 21st century. So I just wanted to pass that on, that the feedback I've received has been very positive as far as our online services that we're offering now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Smith.
Carol, I think the Angel Fund is a good idea. I'm curious, the City of Pinellas Park does an Angel Fund. Are we looking at kind of not reinventing the wheel, but taking their idea and molding it with our own ideas a little bit? Just wanted kind of your thoughts on that.
Yes, we are very much aware of their program and will use their best practices. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up, it looks like is Recreation, Parks, and Arts. And Joan is currently unmuting.
Joan, you need to unmute.
In the top right of your picture, you should be able to. Cover over where you see yourself, and then you'll have a unmute opportunity.
Sometimes it doesn't start in parks.
You can just voice over, John, if you'd like.
There we go.
There you go.
All right. So I'm Joan Byrne, the Director of Recreation, Parks, and Arts. And like everyone who has spoken before me, we support the city's strategic focus areas. And we have initiatives in all three of the major areas: sustainability, community pride, and public health and safety. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what each of those initiatives are. In the FY21 budget request, we address sustainability through continued improvements to our facilities that reduce overall energy consumption, things such as conversions to LED lighting in various places and improved HVAC systems. We have, of course, a number of buildings, and every one of those improvements that has made a huge difference. Several years ago, we converted to LED lighting at the Performing Arts Center, and it saved almost $10,000 a year. And so it's a significant savings for the city. Uniquely in the area of sustainability, we kind of follow the more traditional sustainability, and we talk about environmental sustainability. And in that vein, we continue our commitment to building the city's tree canopy, which of course assists with cleaning the air, cleaning the water. And so our continued investment in expanding the urban tree canopy continues. We continue to simplify landscape designs using more native species, which again are use less water, and reducing chemical applications when we can. So that kind of covers the sustainability area and some of the budget requests related to those. In the area of community pride, the FY21 budget requests some significant upgrades in technical equipment at the Performing Arts Center, which will, I think, ensure quality productions for the community for many, many years to come. It also has funds for the celebration, which will be a little bit late, of the 25th anniversary of Largo Central Park, but we're going to combine that with the 25th anniversary of the Performing Arts Center. So it'll be a double celebration. What form it will take, I am not sure at this point. I'm hoping that we'll be in a little more normal period when that actually happens. We'll also be making an investment in the rebuilding of the Parks building in partnership with the Largo Central Railroad and meeting some of their needs. So we're addressing the parks, the trains, the Performing Arts Center, all of which are clearly sources of community pride in Largo. And finally, in the public health and safety area, there is an area for significant investment and a very important, what we think, new initiative that we want to introduce. And that is to support a mobile recreation program to provide services to underserved parts of the community by bringing recreation programs to neighborhoods that need that support. Coupled with our commitment to expanding virtual opportunities to both youth and senior populations, Our goal is to serve equitably a much broader segment of the population. I would say that no additional staffing is required to provide any of those services. It's simply redeploying how we use some of our people to provide those services to the public. This investment in outreach, coupled with continued replacement of playgrounds, because we have a lot of facilities, so we have a lot of things that need replacement on a regular basis. So replacing playgrounds in neighborhood parks, investments in aquatic and athletic facilities, ongoing fitness equipment replacements will ensure that Largo residents will have safe and up-to-date facilities where they can get fit and stay healthy. So we feel like we are a very publicly visible partner in making Largo the community of choice in Tampa Bay. Thank you, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions? Commissioner Holmes.
Joan, you actually mentioned two things that I had marked on my page here. When you talk about playground replacements on page 16 of the budget, you've got $174,000. But I gather that must be for individual pieces of equipment, because it wouldn't be for the playground in Central Park. That's almost 700,000. So I mean, what's the 174 for?
We have playgrounds in many, many locations.
Yeah, I know.
And playgrounds are on a regular replacement cycle. We have made some changes to that pattern, so I'm not sure which playgrounds are included, but typically it's either the 5 to 12 section or the under 5 is occasionally it's a complete replacement of a playground. I can get you the exact locations later, but it is not Largo Central Park. We're not ready.
No, I know that, but I just saw the 174. The way the thing is phrased, it talks about playground replacements, and I go, well, you can't get much of a replace for $174,000.
No, but all of our playgrounds are divided into 2 areas for those that are safe for toddlers or recommended for under 5, although they like to play with the big kids, and 5 to 12. So often what we will do is to actually just replace one section of the playground. So that you can do for $175,000.
Okay, my next question you touched on, but didn't elaborate. This is talking about recreation on the run, mobile rec services. Can you clarify, go into some detail on what that is?
Yes, our current plan is to identify several areas in the city. We've identified a prospective area near the High Point area, and also one that used to be one of our outreach sites near in the Clearwater Largo Road area at Lake Villa. And what we would do, we would equip a trailer with equipment and a couple of our staff that would go out on a regular schedule and provide a kind of a drop-in playground program for children in the area. It'll require some marketing to those areas to let them know it's there, but it's a very traditional kind of program for kids that can't get to our recreation centers. Maybe they don't have transportation and there isn't a current playground or program in their neighborhood. So like right now, we know that for anybody in the High Point area, Roosevelt Boulevard is a substantial impediment to them using the only park we have on that side, which is Datsco Park. So we're looking to provide that. So that Rec on the Run, mobile recreation, it would be providing on certain days of the week programs in that after school time in the neighborhoods.
All right, thank you.
And I can also go, I was just handed a note. Right now, the playgrounds that will be replaced either in full or partially in the next year will be McMullen Park and Datsco Park.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Joan? All right, doesn't look like there are any. Thank you very much. Next, we'll have library.
Good afternoon. I'm Casey McPhee coming to you from the beautiful Largo Public Library. And this next year, our goals definitely align with all of the city goals, but we're really looking at sustainability and resiliency for many of our proposed major initiatives. So for us, sustainability is defined as increasing the visibility and accessibility of a wide range of trusted materials and services offered by the library that help our residents to be their best selves. So we'd like to enhance service to children and teens by upgrading our library assistant 2 for teen services to a teen librarian position. And this will ensure that we have equitable service to all age populations, children, teen, and adults. And then for the children in our program room in our library, the equipment there is about 15 years old. So we want to update that as well, the AV equipment. And then a big part of our budget is the library collection, the library books. And to ensure that they're in an appealing collection for all readers, we're performing audits of our collection and seeking titles that embrace equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we have a new reading program called Read Woke, which encourages people to read just different topics with thought-provoking characters other than themselves. So we'll continue that as well. And I'm really proud of this program. It was created by a library diversity and inclusion HPO team that we just started in the last month or so. Another big thing we'd like to consider is going fine-free to project a welcoming presence to our marginalized population. And just to give you a little background on that, we would like to come to an upcoming work session to talk to the commission about that. We bring in about $35,000 annually in fines. And this is just the fines, not when people lose something. They certainly still have to pay for materials lost or damaged. But we see that number dropping quite a bit because, first of all, it's never an absolute that you're going to get a fine. And it sometimes turns people away from using the library. So we would like to be able to be one of the fine-free libraries that you may have heard of out in the world. And then we'll continue to assist the Library Foundation with the Library Champions campaign and help secure funding for programs, life-changing programs like Career Online High School, for which we received a $15,000 donation last year to keep that going. And we also need to support the expansion of library outreach, which now includes home delivery for vulnerable populations. And we're utilizing some of the donations we took in for the Mobile Branch Library Initiative, which came in close to $600,000. So the library will celebrate 15 years on July 31st here in our building. We still call it the new building, and she looks great, must agree. And so I thank you for letting me share my thoughts on the future of the library and appreciate all that you do to help us help Largo be the community of choice in Tampa Bay. Glad to answer any questions.
Any questions? It doesn't look like there are any questions. Thank you. And I'd also like to commend you on being the first director to say the community of choice in Tampa Bay. Great job. Next, we'll hear from engineering.
All right, somewhere along the way, I lost my audio.
You've got it. Yeah, you've got it now. You're set.
Okay, there we go. Good afternoon. I am Jerry Wolozinski, the Engineering Services Director, and I'd like to say good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioner, and Finance Advisory Board members. This afternoon, I'd like to talk about a couple items that we're seeking to the city's operating budget. and about talk to about a dozen capital improvement program projects that were scheduled or are scheduled for FY21. And then I'll be happy to answer any questions. And I'm also the proud director to be in a director at a city that's the community of choice in Tampa Bay. With that, those couple of items that we're requesting in the operating budget, one is phase 1 of the 58th Street manhole rehabilitation. There's 13 manholes on 58th Street that are just north of Ulmerton. There's some of our largest and deepest manholes in the city, and they have reached the end or near the end of their life expectancy. And rather than removing them and replacing them at a greater cost, we will be rehabilitating them at a much lower cost. Phase 1 is $185,000 for about half of those. The second item we're requesting in our operating budget is the overhead support that comes along with what Kim Adams had mentioned is our mid-plant project or our biological treatment improvements project at the wastewater treatment plant. The project is going along very well. It's intended to reduce the nitrogen in the effluent going out to Feather Sound and onto Old Tampa Bay. The project build contractor is doing a great job, as well as their design partner. They are behind schedule, and this additional overhead support provides additional funding somewhere later in FY21 for the SRF loan support, our contract inspector, and our design criteria consultant, review package consultant. So those are our two items in the operating budget. Our capital improvement projects continue on with our 4th year of inflow and infiltration abatement program. We're working right now in the lift station 2 area right around Highland Recreation in that neighborhood around it. And we'll be moving into doing a lot of the mitigation repairs to the inflow and infiltration our consultant is identifying right now in that area. The next project on the CIP list is the wastewater treatment facilities disinfection tank reconfiguration construction phase. While we did complete a disinfection project a little over a year ago, the reconfiguration of the tanks are expected to help us with our ongoing concerns about getting a completely disinfected wastewater and eliminating all of the fecal coliform in our effluent. We believe the reconfiguration of those tanks will significantly enhance that disinfection process. Moving on to our mobility or our roads projects. The one we're looking at right now under design is the 20th Street Northwest Community Streets Project. In FY21, we'll be going into the construction phase. Next project is the 127th Avenue Neighborhood Road Project. We'll be going into the design phase for that project. Likewise, design phase for the Valencia Drive Neighborhood Roadway Project. We're going to try to move seamlessly from Rosary Road Phase 1 that we're in right now to a Phase 2A to assist Pinellas County and make some roadway improvements from the stretch about 1,000 feet from Missouri to the back truck entrance at Walmart there. The idea behind that Phase 2A work is to improve the turning radius there at the southeast corner of the intersection of Rosary and Missouri. eliminate the median and improve the lighting along that area. In parallel, we'll be assisting our partners at Pinellas County, and while we're moving seamlessly from phase 1 to 2A, they'll be pushing a replacement large diameter potable water line under the intersection by direct drilling, and by being in wrapping up phase 1 and starting phase 2A, they'll be able to work on both sides of that intersection without damaging any of our previous investments or our future investments. The next roadway project is the Regina Drive roadway, neighborhood roadway project. That will be in design also. And finally, in the mobility program is our annual ongoing pavement rehabilitation fund, which gives us not only the flexibility to tackle any emergency roadway repairs, but also address any of our citizens' complaints that come up throughout the year that are larger in nature than what the organic capability, repair capability is at Public Works. So we find that these annual funds, whether it be in pavements or a little bit later, I'll talk about the stormwater pipe replacement fund, they really help us be more, more reactive or responsive to our citizens when some major situation occurs in or near their neighborhood, their property, and we're more immediately able to address these mid-level repairs to their satisfaction and protecting our assets. Moving on then finally to our stormwater program. We are requesting funding to replace the Egret Drive bridge, which is in theory, or better described as a giant culvert system. And that is one of the several bridges in the city of Largo that the Florida Department of Transportation inspects and gives us their recommendation for repairs. We have had the design completed for that, and now we're moving into the actual repair or construction phase. Then finally, we have 2 stormwater best management correction projects. One of them is in the greater Clearwater Road area, and the other one is in the greater Starkey Road stormwater basin area. And then finally, we are looking at the alum treatment process in our waterways in the nature preserve, and we've been working with Swift Mud to come up with an alternative or set of alternatives we can look at to replace that alum system. So the funding we're requesting is a study to have a consultant take a look at what alternatives do we have to replace what had been a pilot study with Swift Mud using alum to treat the water quality moving through the preserve. So that's our snapshot of our program coming up in 21. We'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Any questions for Jerry? My only question in seeing the Egret Drive bridge on there, I'm a little bit familiar with that. And I know that there's, I think it's somewhat passable for small boats. Is that correct? And if so, is the intention to leave it somewhat passable for small boats for the people that live, I guess, inland along that creek?
It will be. It'll remain the same, I guess, passage quality for kayakers and boaters. It will improve. What ended up happening a few years ago was both the DOT inspection and some of the community kayakers in the area were concerned about spalling and pieces of the debris falling off of those, for again, lack of a better term, the culverts that people are passing through there.
Right.
So it was really an ability to make those corrections, but yeah, no change to who can pass through there.
All right. Any other questions? Well, thank you. Next up, we'll move on to environmental services. I believe. There we go.
I'm going to find out. Okay, very good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's been exciting listening to everybody's presentation because environmental services is your local wastewater plant, sewage plant, and we collaborate with just about every department in the city, and are very passionate about doing that and adding to the charge of making Largo the city of choice in Tampa Bay. We are 87 and a quarter people strong, and are focused on collecting the sewage, bringing it to the plant, treating the sewage, recycling the water, taking the solids and turning it into a usable fertilizer product that in the form of pellets, and also having a environmental group that takes care of protecting our collection system and wastewater plant by looking at who discharges to us and making sure that they are in compliance as well. And also we have a laboratory that does compliance analysis for us, about half of our compliance analysis. And that's what our operating budget supports. The charges that we're looking at for 2021 is to continue our efforts to meet a consent order that the city entered into in April of 2016, and will be closing out in about a year and a half. And it's important for us to meet the requirements of that. And one of those is to significantly reduce sanitary sewer overflows that we're doing very well in. And we will continue that effort. We also want to be in compliance with all of the effluent, which is our liquid byproduct that goes out, our effluent water quality requirements. There's one particular compound that we have to pay close attention to, and we're working closely on trying to resolve that. We hope to have that completed as well. And also, besides the consent order, we were given what's called an administrative order a number of years ago, dealing with the discharge of total nitrogen in our effluent to Tampa Bay. Just as all the other discharges received an allocation, we received one. And that administrative order sunset, and the Department of Environmental Protection rolled that in to the consent order. So now that is also one of our focal areas that our operating budget supports. And we work closely with the engineering department for all of these kinds of efforts when it comes to construction projects and capital projects. The other area of our focus for our operational budget is our asset management initiative, where we're using asset management software and concepts to better prioritize work that needs to be done, both maintenance and rehabilitation, and also replacement of our assets. The environmental services sewage assets are pretty close to $1 billion, which is a lot of money, and they have to be maintained well. And I really do appreciate the support we've had from the city over many, many years in budgeting to do that. And that has kept the city out of some real harm that other folks have found themselves in elsewhere. The one capital project that we'll be handling ourselves at Environmental Services is the replacement of a polymer system for our biosolids. The one that we have now is over 20 years old. polymer system. Polymer is just a chemical that helps with the dewatering of the biosolids so that it's less expensive to treat and dispose of. And the project is $275,000 and is found on page 346 of your budget. And with that, I'll answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Any questions for environmental services? All right, great job. Moving on to Public Works.
Well, thank you. I don't know if this is the best for last or just the last for last, but I'll bring up the rear here and hopefully get you guys on to the next thing. So I'm Matt York, Public Works Director. We have 5 divisions of Public Works: administration, solid waste, streets and stormwater, facility maintenance, and our fleet services. And moving into this next year, we have got some things going on. We've got some things that got pushed back like everybody else in the city did. But one of the big things that we've got for Public Works is we're going to get a new roof put on our administration building. Current roof is held together by chicken wire and other sundry things that Public Works can put together to keep things floating. So that's going to be about $250,000. Also at that time, we will be doing some analysis on whether or not we can successfully put solar panels on top of the building at some time in the future. So that's one of the things for our sustainability, that if we're going to continue to be in that building for a long period of time, we want to make sure that we look at those opportunities. Our fleet division, you will notice in your budget, there are some vehicles that we are still purchasing for next year. We have our police vehicles, some fire apparatus, and also our solid waste trucks. So we'll be moving forward with keeping those top notch and have a great fleet like we strive to do every day. We will also be looking at our alternative fuel goals for 2030. Pushing vehicles back is going to modify that a little bit, but we are still in the right path to get there by 2030 still, and we're going to continue to fight to make sure we get that goal. One of the big things that we have personnel-wise, we do have one of our coordinators is going to become a supervisor of our facility construction projects group. This person is extremely busy with a lot of great projects that we have on town. Irv out at Environmental Services has a new ops building being constructed right now. A lot of you were there for the groundbreaking of that. We are 3 stories in and roof on, so we are making some very good headway with that project. And we've got a really great project coordinator that is on that project that is saving the city sizable amounts of money with his due diligence on a daily basis out there. So he'll be hopefully getting that promotion here soon. Commissioner Holmes stole my gusto with the Fire Station 39 project that we have en route. So we'll be getting that going. And we will also in Public Works, as project manager of the City Hall project, we've got some movement going there as well. And hopefully within the next couple of months, we'll be at a commission workshop to go through where we're at and kind of the next steps moving forward. So Public Works is here to serve this community of choice and do whatever we need to do. I would like to take a quick opportunity to thank our facility maintenance management group and custodians. This COVID pandemic has really kind of done some havoc on facilities and getting people back to work and making them feel safe while they're at work. And our custodial team and our facilities teams have really gone above and beyond to make sure that the city of Largo is ready to go. And when we opened the doors on day one, after we took an extra day off because of some HVAC issues, we hit the ground running and we haven't looked back since. So I'd like to thank those guys for that, but I'll be here to answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Public Works? Commissioner Holmes.
Henry, not wishing to steal any more thunder from anybody, why are we spending $250,000 putting a roof on an old building when we've already had a discussion about moving everything from Public Works to the south on ground that is not quite as unstable as Fleet is right now, where we have some rather substantial cracks in the walls and some doors that are barely opening and closing. And not only that, it seems to me that that front building is rather ancient. So, I mean, we've already appropriated the money to move the fuel tanks, and we're putting them above ground, anticipating moving them at a future date. Why are we spending $250,000 fixing this roof when we may be building a whole new building farther south?
There was an analysis done on building a new public works facility probably about 3 years ago now. And the estimated cost of that was, if I remember right, approaching $30 million. We simply don't have the money right now to replace the public works complex. So realistically, we will probably be in the existing public works building for at least another 10 years. It's, I would say at this point, it will be a project for the next penny, which will be the 2030s.
So what are we going to do about Fleet, though? Because that building's is really not that functional. I mean, I've been in there. I've seen the great cracks in the walls and the floor and everything else. I mean, that ground is settling in there.
Yeah, and Fleet is in the same building as the administration. It's all one building there. Yeah, what we're going to make do with that facility for as long as we can. Again, it clearly should be replaced, but unfortunately, we just have so much money to go around. So again, you know, I think we're viewing that as a project that's more likely to occur. I hate to say this, but after 2030.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, Matt, no more thunder stealing.
All right, thank you, Commissioner.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. At this point, I'm going to suggest that we take just a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll come back for OPB financial overview with some numbers and overview of major funds and then tax rate details. So right now we're going to be back 5 minutes after 3. See you then.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, the screen kind of moved around a little bit, but it looks like folks are coming back, and it is a little bit after 3:05.
Did the screen successfully switch over to the PowerPoint for everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
And we're good to go whenever you are.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Will Payne. I'm the Performance and Budget Manager. With me is Jared Meyer, available Treasury Manager, and Ms. Simonis to help answer any questions as we go through this. Thanks for the intermission. Otherwise, I was going to make everybody do some jumping jacks before we got into this section. So you lucked out. I did want to take a minute to thank everyone in the departments, all of those directors, assistant directors, their managers, their staff, who put a lot of time and effort into developing the budget. And it was really a team effort, and they did it during a pretty tumultuous few months. Also wanted to thank and especially acknowledge Matt DiFiore and Sean Lopez, two of our management analysts who worked incredibly hard behind the scenes to help put this together. So thanks to everyone to get us through this and where we are today. So as we jump into looking over the long-range financial plan, that is the section of the budget document we'll be talking about today. I'm not going to go into each fund individually. I'm going to go over the highlights and talk at a slightly higher level, but please interrupt me at any time with questions that you have. I'll also pause and take time on each fund as we go through for questions. So with that, we will jump into it. I wanted to start off with an overview and just talk about a few of the big picture things as it relates to our overall financial picture. As was mentioned earlier, and I think we mentioned even at CIP time, we know there are COVID revenue impacts all over the place as we were trying to develop the budget. As people cut back on shopping, tourist travel declined for us, those impacts on sales tax are seen throughout the budget. Having to close facilities and not receive user fees and those things that when people show up to pay for services, that's got a dramatic immediate impact on revenue. We also talked a bit about people driving less and fewer accidents. It also meant that there was less gas being purchased, and we'll see some impacts as we go through the different funds as it relates to fuel and consumption taxes. What we don't know right now are some of the longer term impacts on things like development and real estate and property values. Right now that looks stable, but time will tell. As we went through the process of developing these long-range financial plans, we modeled multiple scenarios. So I think we've talked about, there's a lot of uncertainty with the future financial picture right now because we're still kind of in the middle of it. I want to thank Jared because he worked very hard and helped us put together multiple scenarios. We know we've got to put together a plan, but we also need to take into account that uncertainty for the future. And so in a number of places, we did look at what a best case, a middle case, a worst case scenario would be as it related to reopening timelines and things like that. The financial projections that you see here are based on that best case scenario, which is opening when we did, and people are returning to purchasing and things like that, facilities are open. But we do have that information, and to Commissioner Carroll's earlier question about how we're thinking longer term about these immediate impacts, we're keeping some analysis on hand as far as what different scenarios look like over the long term, not just based on our one snapshot in time here. Impacts due to COVID didn't just affect revenues beyond our control, they also affected how we approached rate increases. I know Kim Adams talked about this a little bit earlier, but we do have stormwater, wastewater, and solid waste rate increases scheduled over these next 5 years. As we went through the budget, knowing that this is having an impact on residents as well. We also reevaluated our rate increase timing and strategy, and we'll talk about that a little more. And finally, as it relates to available revenues and changes in rate increases, schedules, and just the overall impact of economic changes, we did have to shift expenditures. And so those were talked about a few times in some of the department presentations, but you can also see on page 259 at the front of the CIP section, a listing of changes from the proposed CIP. I know when we discussed the CIP, there was some question about that it was originally based on that best case scenario. So we'll go into that a little more as we go through, but it affected all of our asset portfolios: vehicles, pavement, facilities, wastewater, stormwater. We tried to make sure that it didn't only affect one more heavily than others, but again, we'll talk about that in a little more detail. So with that, we'll start taking a look at our rate and revenue increase schedule. Under property tax, we last year came into the budget with achieving our fund balance targets and therefore had 5% estimated property tax revenue increases in the future years and in FY21. In this proposed budget, we do have the proposed property tax rate with a 6% revenue increase and 6% in the out years, contributing to those long-range projections. Solid waste, that rate increase remains unchanged. Stormwater, again, is where we made a shift. So originally we had 25% rate increases scheduled in 21 and 23. We pushed that FY21 rate increase back a year and reduced that 23 rate increase to 20%. And as Mr. Adams noted, we changed that 25% rate increase that was originally in FY21 for the wastewater fund to 3 consecutive years of a 10% rate increase. So we can talk about these individual rate increases when we jump into the funds, but I'll just take a minute. Does anyone have a question about the overall picture of the rate increases on this slide?
Any questions? I can't see all of you, so just speak up if you have a question.
All right. So I'm going to save the general fund for last, but we'll go as much in order through the LRFP as we can. Starting with the golf course. Don't have a lot to go over with the golf course fund. You will see that we do hit a negative fund balance in the 5th year, but right now, revenues this year are probably a little bit of an unusual year for the golf course. And you can see the first 3 years here are still pretty stable from a fund balance standpoint and expenditure standpoint. So while in the past, sometimes we'll put a rate increase or a revenue increase in the out years, we know there are a lot of things in flux or underway right now, the ULI project underway, and waiting to see what play and participation and usage and things look like. So we'll continue to monitor that. But as we said, it's still stable in the first few years, and we'll evaluate that each year as we always do. And I've also got the page numbers of these funds at the top of the slide here, just in case you need them to follow along. So the golf course fund we're looking at is on page 113. Solid waste fund, again, similar in that we don't have a lot of changes from what we discussed at CIP time. Healthy enough fund balance. We do have the rate increase scheduled in there. We'll continue to monitor tipping fees and the recycling market. Like Matt York said in the public works presentation, we do have capital programmed in there as far as replacement of vehicles and things like that, and that has remained pretty much on schedule. Jumping into the wastewater fund. So again, this is where we did shift the rate increase schedule and timing. And so you can see our fund balance does dip a little low here in 22 and 23 after we have a very heavy capital year in 21. I do want to note that there are still a lot of capital projects out there. So just because you see the green bar look a little smaller in the out years, we're always trying to balance those capital expenditures with available revenues. We do need those rate increases to support, appropriate revenues for that borrowing that we have for the major projects. But there are additional projects beyond the 5th year and that we did have to reshuffle around CIP time to keep this at an appropriate level.
Hey, Will, what's the payoff date on the wastewater loan?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. I don't know if Jared has that, but we can certainly get that for you.
Maybe, Henry, do you know?
Well, I don't know the exact date, but I believe they're 20-year loans. So it's out quite a ways, yeah.
Yeah,
Right, so
it's the one that's the first loan is about a 17.5-year amortization.
all right, so when you're showing these fund balances, that's taking in consideration that we're paying these loans off at the same time. Yes.
Sorry, can you clarify that question?
When I see these fund balances, I'm assuming that all this revenue is anticipating paying the loans off at the same time.
We're
schedule.
Yeah, Jared, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, it's the payments it's amortized and the payments are equal payments. So they're always going to be in the numbers for the next 20 years.
Okay.
17. Yep.
Hey, Commissioner Holmes, page 274 of the budget, there's a debt schedule for both of those revolving loan funds. Is that the ones you're asking about?
Thank you, Commissioner Robinson. Any other questions on the wastewater fund?
Give me that page number again.
274. Any other questions? I don't see any.
All right. So one that we'll stop and talk a little bit more about, page 118, is the county gas tax fund. So this is one where we did see a substantial revenue change as a result of reduced consumption. So we're looking at about a 17% reduction in estimated revenue for FY20 compared to what we had budgeted. Over the next 5 years on the revenue side, we don't have county gas tax revenues returning to what our actual collections were in 19. So the county gas tax we use to pay for a lot of our road paving. And one of the things this does is we often pay for a lot of these road projects out of multiple funds. And so that reduction in funding and county gas tax, not just in this year, but on an ongoing basis, you can see that fund balance dips in a couple years when we do have some big paving projects. And so balancing those funding sources is always a challenge, especially when the revenue is reduced on an ongoing basis like this. Happy to answer any additional questions here.
Any other questions for? No, I'm just anxious to see what the state does to help solve this for cities throughout the whole state.
Yeah, so when you look at that schedule of changes from the proposed CIP, this was one of the drivers of some of those proposed changes. I believe Rosary Road Part 2 is deferred. And so that's a case of a project where, a reasonable amount of county gas tax money in 1 year can make or break the difference in having an appropriate fund balance in this fund. And so that's where balancing multiple funding sources and seeing a reduction in something like this plays into how we had how to reschedule some of those capital projects.
And if I can just add in here, this was an example. The county does have the ability to levy an additional 5 cents per gallon motor fuel tax. They chose not to do that because they thought a better solution was going to referendum on a sales tax increase for transportation. And then they thought better of that for this November, considering the current economic conditions. So that's where we are right now on funding from the county.
All right, so our next fund is the Construction Services Fund. While development has remained pretty strong, we've seen very healthy revenues in this fund and a healthy fund balance. One thing I'll note that is different in this fund this year, you might notice that reserve placed for $2 million, and that's setting aside a reserve for a future land management software replacement in a later year. You know, we have the Enterprise Technology Capital Fund, but as it happens, a number of our Enterprise Technology Capital projects have taken place before we've really had a chance to build that fund to support some of them. And that would be the case even for a future land management software. So we did go ahead and set aside a reserve in this fund, thinking about that years in the future, and we'll still work on that Enterprise Technology Capital Fund as a sort of ongoing longer term tool for those projects. And I'll just note again that this is subject to the development environment. So this is one of those things from a longer term impacts where we don't know what the future is going to look like when we have big developments, you know, apartment projects like we've seen. That contributes to the revenues in this fund, but not knowing what the market looks like in the future, certainly the impacts to revenues year to year in this fund can vary substantially depending on what projects are coming in. So the next fund is the West Bay Drive CRA Fund. As you might have noted in the budget, in addition to our property value growth citywide, the CRA saw really strong property value growth, 9.96%. We also did highlight in the video at the beginning a number of the capital projects going on down there. You will see in 21 and 22 pretty substantial capital spending in the fund, and that's where the fund balance dips, but continues to grow again in future years as the capital eases up a little bit. One unknown in this fund is what role it may play in the future City Hall project downtown. So that isn't accounted for in any capital funding in there right now. So you see the fund balance growing, but that's just something to keep in mind for that longer term. Any questions about the CRA? All right.
Doesn't sound like it. Go ahead.
So jumping into our housing funds, we won't go into each one of these individually, but they include our community development block grant fund, our SHIP fund, home fund, and our housing trust fund. Two things I did want to note here is we do expect to be seeing some CARES Act funding as it relates to some community development activities. But on the flip side, the SHIP fund was, I believe, put on a sort of hold this year. We thought it was going to be fully funded coming into the state's budget, and then they did veto it. They didn't appropriate the money somewhere else, but they're going to revisit it later this fall once they see how things play out. So that money is, I believe, planning to just stay in the trust fund for now. So while there may be some additional funds for the types of activities and services, the rental assistance and relief that we provide with some of our housing funds, there's also some uncertainty when it comes to what the state's going to do with SHIP funding. Any questions about our housing funds? All right. Our next one where, again, we've seen a substantial impact over the last few months is the local option sales tax, also called the penny for Pinellas. Like we mentioned before, sales tax with people shopping less, reduced tourism, saw a pretty sizable impact. Some of the data is a bit delayed. So again, we still are on a little bit of a lag, but we have a close to 10% reduction estimated for FY20 compared to what was originally budgeted. The silver lining here is that our budget numbers were a bit conservative in that our actuals have tended to come in a good bit higher on the revenue side than what we budgeted. And coming into April, we were seeing about 7% higher collections than we had budgeted, which means that our reduction was maybe a little less of an impact from a percentage standpoint than we might otherwise have seen. But we do have reduced revenues budgeted in there over the next couple of years, returning to some growth in the late years. This is one that affects all of our capital project portfolios. So I did want to speak to something from the last City Commission and Finance Advisory Board meeting when we talked about this around the capital improvement program. And this was largely where some of our impacts and big expenditure changes happened, and those changes from the proposed CIP. So as everyone discussed, first we tried to make sure we took a look at that project scoring and criteria and making sure that we took a look at things from a priority and strategic importance standpoint. Some of the other factors when we were looking at how to balance this were making sure we disrupted the proposed CIP as much as possible, or as little as possible, so that we didn't totally turn it upside down. We wanted to see where we could make some changes, but try and hew as close to that proposed CIP as made sense. And last, as I mentioned a little earlier, didn't want to disproportionately impact one portfolio over another. So, losing all of our funding for pavement, but maintaining it everywhere else. So you saw impacts both to the fire station schedule, mobility funding, some stormwater projects, a number of places as it relates to the reduced revenues in the penny. So I'll pause for some questions on that one if anyone has any.
Any questions, just speak up because I only have a few people on my screen.
Okay, no questions on the penny.
Hey, Will, one thing, why are you showing the big spike? I'm trying to read your thing on your key on the bottom here. So the green is the capital fund itself. The gold line is the fund balance. Why are you showing that big spike in 23?
Let me take a look. I hope that is not a fat-fingered key that.
Well, you're showing a $12 million balance with only like 5 million in spending.
Yeah, that's. I'm going to suspect that may be an extra digit just in the data for the graph, and I'll take a look at that. The fund balance that you see in the LRFP is the dollar fund balance that we want to project there. I am limited on my number of screens to pull up an alternate view here.
Yeah, we can certainly check those numbers, but this sometimes is the nature of these funds that are all capital projects. So you'll see you'll build up quite a fund balance in one year and then you spend it all the next year. So that's why you see sometimes you're on this roller coaster also. We still need to check the numbers, but that sometimes is what happens because you will see that the capital expenditures are so much lower that year also.
Well, yeah, it looks like we're not doing anything with it, buying a couple of cars and a fire truck. That's about it.
Mary?
Looking at the long-range financial plan on page 125, the fund balance is a lot higher that year, but it's at 3.7 million, not whatever that number is indicating there.
Well, it looks like 11.5 million.
My apologies. That would be a typo in the graph creation, but the number in the LRFP is the number to use.
But it sure looks nice at 11.5.
I think I wish we had that kind of fund balance that year. There would have been fewer disruptions to the CIP. So one of the last major funds we're going to touch on specifically here is the Stormwater Fund. Again, we talked about that change in the rate increases. You can see our fund balance does dip pretty low in FY22. And this was still with some reshuffling of projects and things in here. While you see the fund balance does grow again, this is the same dynamic that we've talked about at CIP time and in past budgets, which is we have a lot of repair and maintenance and capital needs. that we just try and balance putting in here with available revenues. So there's things that came out of here that certainly would love to go back in. We just try and balance those expenditures with the available revenue based on collections and rates and things like that. So if there are no questions on the Stormwater Fund, just real quick, our impact fee funds. Just a reminder, these include our transportation impact fee, which we're working to spend down. It's no longer collecting revenues. Multimodal impact fee, parkland and recreation facility impact fee, and tree impact fees. Again, just as far as some of those mobility projects getting rescheduled, change some of the balances in particularly that transportation and multimodal impact fee funds. We're working to spend down that TIF fund. Rescheduling road projects changes that timing a little bit, and similarly with the multimodal impact fee, it just depends on project scheduling, timing, and available resources.
Mayor, could I ask Will a question?
Please go ahead.
I know it's a tiny amount, Will, but where are you talking about putting the money for things like with the code enforcement initiatives, the Angel Fund and so forth? Is that going to show up here?
They aren't going to show up here. They're still going to go in the general fund. What we did with that budget request was show the expected revenues and the expected expenditures as it related to a new initiative.
Thank you.
So our internal service funds have adequate fund balances. One thing that I'll note with the fleet fund is we were able to build up that reserve that we are now able to use to fund that fleet fuel tank replacement project in the CIP. So that's one of those financial tools coming to support a project like that to help us make that upgrade over at fleet. If there are no questions on the internal services fund, we'll stop and take some time at the general fund. So fortunately, a few other people have already provided the intro and the groundwork to this. We were really fortunate to come into this budget in a very good position. Our actual fund balance that you can see, we ended 19 at 26.9%, which was above our target. Commission and city manager have worked to build that fund balance over the years, and I think that really helped us as we were putting together this budget for this year. On the revenue side, again, impacts related to COVID and economic disruption, utility taxes. So we're going to see reduced collection in utility taxes this year because fuel prices are low. Duke's normally annualized adjustment they did in 1 month this year. And so we saw a reduction in utility tax revenues that is going to be a little unique to this year, but it was nonetheless noticeable. And similarly, we're likely looking at reduced franchise fees. On the intergovernmental side, we have talked about sales tax revenue and fuel tax. That plays a role here in the half-cent sales tax and revenue sharing from the state, reductions in the motor fuel tax. Again, looking at something like 16%. The bright spot, again, is property taxes. So our property values grew over 8%, and that coupled with the fund balance in the proposed budget help us kind of weather those revenue losses to be where we are in this proposed general fund. You can see the fund balance is down now to a bit over 15%, and we dip a little bit and then it stabilizes as we get towards 16%. So that is, using that fund balance to strategically support those investments while also kind of weathering those revenue losses. As I mentioned before, also here, user fees, having to close facilities and not being able to collect fees for programs and activities and things like that. That's an immediate revenue loss. And even though we said this is sort of our best case scenario general fund, it doesn't mean that revenues are going back to the way they were in February right away. So, we do expect to have to climb out of this over time. As Mary mentioned earlier, on the expenditure side, our reductions, we did treat the unique changes in estimated 20 as one-time things. We saw savings in this year, but we didn't assume those savings are going to happen every year. And we did try and reprogram those things that were deferred this year into future years, because they were programmed for FY20 because they were important and intentional. And so while we did hold off, we tried to reprogram those for future years. And I'm going to pause and open for some question or discussions on this one.
Any general fund questions? Doesn't look like.
Maybe I'll just jump in. This is Henry, real quick. And we can talk about this more when we get to establishing the maximum property tax rate for next year. But, in the proposed budget, we assumed a slight reduction in the property tax rate, which I thought made a lot of sense considering the significant growth we have in property values for this year. I guess I'm a little less optimistic now than I was when I first formulated that recommendation. As I said at the beginning of this afternoon, there is a lot of uncertainty out there. And one of the questions is going to be, while property values were very strong for the upcoming fiscal year, 2022 might be a little more interesting than we anticipated. We obviously don't know yet. We talked about that a little bit today in our countywide city manager meeting. It looks like, and this doesn't have a huge impact on us here in Largo, but it looks like hotels, particularly along the beach, may be recovering a little faster than maybe we thought they would. However, I think the big question mark is the commercial sector. As more, what we don't know is what, for lack of a better way of putting it, the casualty rate's going to be amongst retail. How many of those stores are going to go out of business and never come back? How many of those restaurants are going to close? So you may have some shopping centers, an example, that maybe before the pandemic were 90% occupied. And next year, when the property appraiser looks at them, they're only going to be 60% occupied. And one of the factors that the property appraiser uses when valuing commercial property is the income that's generated by that property. So I think at this point, it may be more prudent to keep the property tax rate at the current level rather than doing the slight reduction that I originally recommended. But I think that's something everybody needs to think about.
That tees me up, although it leaves my slide a little bit out of date here. But to at least communicate the information that's in the proposed budget document that we can then build off of per the city manager's comments. What's included in the proposed budget document is the 5.50 proposed tax rate. So that is reduced. We're currently at 5.62. Property value growth is a little over 8%. The 5.5 rate constitutes a 5% increase in a tax bill and property tax revenue growth of approximately 6%. And as we talked about looking at some of the revenue losses, that's kind of what in that long range plan of the general fund is helping us balance that out to use that fund balance, but then stabilize to be able to keep going forward. We do gain some benefit from annexation and new construction this year. That's some of that differential there. So that, before we get into, I guess, the closing slides, then that is the only other piece on the general fund and the tax rate and things like that. And we are going to provide those millage rate scenarios and tax rates at the TRIM hearing, which will be on July 21st. So with that, we get to our direction from the City Commission to the Finance Advisory Board on the proposed budget.
Hey, Woody. Hey, Will, Henry, you still there?
Yes, I am.
Would you care to share any more of the little prognostications that the county was telling you and other parties about? I mean, what do they think is going to be the revenue situation with gas tax, with the lost funding and anything else where we would get it from the county? You know, the potential mitigations is going to have a lot to do with this rate that we put on the property tax.
Yes, and I think Merity and her team have had some discussions with the other budget and finance people around the county on that. The discussion we had today was more focused on the on property tax. The property appraiser, I guess, was looking at a few months ago. I mean, when this all started, I guess he was looking at a pretty significant reduction potentially in values. He's now moved to more of perhaps a slight increase, but it's going to be much less than we've been experiencing. But that's also subject to change. You know, again, those numbers are set based on values on January 1. And it's highly dependent on the course of this virus, the course of the economy in response to that, how quickly consumers are willing to start spending money again, when they're willing to go back into restaurants, you know, when they're just feeling more comfortable, when they get their jobs back. So there is just still a considerable uncertainty. But again, and actually, who's ever running this program, we really need to see all the commissioners up on the screen. Yeah, thank you. So again, Meredith, have you've been having, and Will, you've been having some more conversations with your peers in the area. Maybe you can add a little bit to this discussion.
Sure. I guess, was it last week or the week before, we had a regional budget meeting essentially with various municipalities. And all of the revenue projections that you saw here today are really in line with what everyone else is thinking. I think the biggest takeaway that I had from the meeting really was that one is there's just a lot of uncertainty, and that the sales tax changes are really something that we need to keep an eye on going forward. That's probably going to be the most significant impact. And then they did talk about projecting possibly a 3% decrease in property values for next year. So in terms of setting a millage rate, if the property values decrease, that means in order to keep the same amount of revenue, we have to increase our rate. Instead of right now, we can decrease our rate and actually get more revenue. So just in terms of political considerations, that's something that they are projecting for next year.
Mm-hmm.
Meredith, could you talk a little bit about the lag time between, you and I talked about this not too long ago, about how long it takes for us to see an impact from a sales tax reduction. Like for the month of April and May, when do we see those numbers? When do we see that money?
Yeah, it takes a couple months. I'm actually going to turn this over to Jared because revenue collection is his wheelhouse and using that for projection. So I'll let Jared answer that.
All right.
Sure. So each revenue is a little bit different, but if you're looking at sales tax, you got to think the provider has to, the businesses collect the sales tax, and then they turn around and have to remit it to the state, and then the state will turn around and remit it back to us. Or if it's on the local option sales tax, they then remit it back to the county, who then remits it back to us. So usually there's a couple month lag in when we see the revenues from the projected months. So it's a couple months lag.
Yes, one thing that kind of struck me was that even with a pandemic that essentially shut down retail for a month solid, if not a little bit longer, we only saw a a partial reduction in the sales tax revenue for that period of time. So I guess, and I know that now sites like Amazon are collecting sales tax a lot more than they did 5 years ago. So I guess my question is, how effective is the state now at collecting sales tax from online sales, and is that kind of buffering the effect from this real brick and mortar commercial retail shutdown that happened for 90 days or so?
Well, we live in a very unique state. The Supreme Court had ruled, a couple of years ago that states could levy sales taxes on internet sales. We are the only state in the country that has decided not to extend our sales tax to online sales that occur out of state. Now, they do apply to sales from companies like Amazon now because they do have a physical presence in the state. So yes, it's helped quite a bit in that Amazon in particular now has a physical presence in the state, but there are other companies that the state still does not collect sales tax from.
All right. Any other questions about general fund or revenues?
Mayor, I would just ask, I know we're going to have more discussion on millage rates, but again, and I know Meredith and her team will do this, the difference in the millage rate versus what the actual dollars and cents for the homeowners in Largo is always important to me. Because when Henry came in with a slight reduction recommendation, I'd like to know what that equates to, and I'd like to be able to communicate that to other people.
I also think, and I don't know if we usually do this or not, but I think that it'd be important to note a homesteaded property as opposed to a non-homesteaded property, because there's limits on how much that property, if we're assuming that the property value went up 8%, but homesteaded property is capped at 3%, then there's going to be less of an increase in the taxable value for that particular property. And that makes a difference.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So when we get to the meeting on the 21st, where we set the maximum millage rate, we'll provide you with the millage analysis that we do every year. And in terms of homesteaded properties, they're increasing 2.3%. That's the Florida 2020 CPI rate, Consumer Price Index.
That's right, yeah.
So they're only at 2.3%, and then commercial is capped at 10%. So we have, our average homesteaded home value is around, I believe it's about 140,000. Oh, my screen froze again. But you'll see all of that information on the 21st, so you can make those types of decisions with all the data.
I'm also confident that the property appraiser will make that calculator available as he's done last year, so people can look up their own impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'm not sure exactly where we are as far as, I think we're directions to both staff as well as the Finance Advisory Board as far as what type of issues we would like the Finance Advisory Board to just kind of discuss independently and bring back some recommendations or input to us with. Am I correct on that?
That is correct. It's direction. And then after that, I just want to go over some next steps in the budget process for everyone. So the direction in the ordinance for the Finance Advisory Board laid out is revenue sources or changes to existing revenues, service level changes and whether these changes are aligned with strategic priorities, discussing the proposed budget document as a communication tool, and then any other items as directed by the City Commission.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to kind of add, just a terminology when we're talking about revenues. I think revenue diversification is something that could be discussed or should be discussed. I know basically what you said means that, but I think it's good to kind of trigger how can we be more diverse in our revenue stream so that when things like COVID happen or hurricanes happen or whatever, we're more resilient, or property values drop. As a entity, we're more resilient from taking a big hit. As far as other items, does anybody, Ms. Gentry, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself, so you have to press the little button.
Now?
There you go.
Okay,
yes.
Good. You skipped over number 6, City Commission and Finance Advisory Board discussion, and there were a couple of things that I heard this afternoon that I would like to share. One of the things that I want to say right off, and I'm saying this because I think I'm the oldest member of the FAB board, not only in age right now, but also in years of experience, years of service. Welcoming Valerie Hibbert to our group. It's so nice to see you here, and I look forward to working with you. And I want to thank you in advance for being willing to give your time to the community. You know, a lot of things are really down and out right now as far as what we're involved in. I think in years to come, if you look through materials, there will be an asterisk beside our year of 2020 and maybe even 2021. But I'm so appreciative of the fact that Henry mentioned that we needed to be nimble and flexible and agile. And I think I'm interpreting that, Henry, as not only in our thinking, but also in our actions. We need to use those skills in both of those areas as we go forward. As we look at a budget, I like to think, you know, it's not just a big book of numbers and columns. It's a blueprint if you're a builder. It's a playbook if you're a coach. It's a recipe book if you're a cook. And it's a roadmap if you're the leader on a trip. And quite frankly, that's what we're all doing. We're trying to build our community, and we're trying to coach our community in the best way to win the game. And we're trying to cook up some real good ideas. And we're trying to, you all, our elected leaders, are trying to make sure that you've got the roadmap in front of you, and not only are you going to lead us, but you are going to be able to lead us because we are willing to follow you. As I said, this is a period in time, quite frankly, for our staff. It's a period that you plan for, you built for, you train for, to be able to step forward at a crucial time and use all your skills and all your intellect and all your abilities to get the job done. And that's true not only for the staff, but also for the elected leaders. We look for creative expansion, creative ideas, but also the idea that we have a can-do effort. You mentioned in the beginning all the engagement, and I think that's really important. You talked about employee engagement. You certainly are engaging the public more than probably ever before. You are certainly engaging with one another in other elected bodies, the state, the county, other cities. And I see a lot of good interaction and engagement on the dais there at your meetings. I see some teamwork effort going, and that's not always the case. We only have to look at our nation's capital to see that that's not always possible. But we need to keep in mind that those are the skills that really are going to bring us together. And I'd like to tell you that I really see this year as very much like 1968. Now, I realize some of you weren't alive in 1968, but if you go back and look at some of the history, or if you've watched any of the series that they're doing on TV on 1968, it was a really rough, tough year. But that was the year that we came to Florida because Uncle Sam said that's where Albert needed to go. And we didn't plan to stay, but we did stay. And I can say that as a community of choice, we get points, I think, for using that phrase today. It is indeed a good place to live, a good place to work, a good place to raise a family, and a good place to retire. And quite frankly, I've done all four of those, and it's still a great place to be. So I just needed to have that said, and to tell you, thank all of you, staff and elected officials, for helping us through this period of time. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to answer that a little bit, I'd like to thank you for appointing me to the Recreation and Parks Advisory Board many years back. It wasn't 1968, but it was a little while ago.
I know. And it was one of the best things I ever did.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thanks, John. Any other questions? All right, as far as direction for the Finance Advisory Board, anything above what is kind of outlined for them to discuss?
Question, I guess, for Merity. The HPO concept has been introduced to the Finance Advisory Board. They're very familiar with it. And I guess I would just ask that we always look for opportunities to knock down the siloed thinking that used to exist and look for input from the community where we might see one improvement that is brought to us for our attention, but we might not see the one right behind it that's just out of focus. So that whole philosophy and concept, wherever we can exercise that, I think it'd be great.
Any other input? I know, Will, you mentioned the aspects that we would have the Finance Advisory Board take a look at, and I don't recall this being one of the things you mentioned, but in the past we have had them take a look at our unfunded CIP projects and kind of prioritize those, if you will, for funding. I know that a lot of this is a lot of this is kind of uncertain as far as how much funding we're going to get from a lot of different avenues. And so if we have the means, I think it would be good to get some input as far as what could be next up. So I'd like that to be added to the list.
Mayor, can I add on to that a little bit, or kind of ask a question in regards to that?
Please do.
That was actually one of the questions I had written down. So what are the factors in deciding whether a project is funded or unfunded for the CIP? It's open to anybody who'd like to answer that question.
Sure, I'll start. So this year we went through some exercises similar to we've done in the budget process with the executive leadership team after projects were proposed and vetted to do some group prioritization on strategic alignment and how they would advance strategic goals and sort of get a not necessarily a score, but a ranking of preferences exactly to what y'all have been talking about as far as what would our top priorities be if funding is available. And then we just always have to overlay that with the unique funding constraints of different funds and timing and fund balances. Sure. And like that. So
right, because I mean, yeah, no, and excuse me for interrupting, but so I mean, when you're looking at some of those projects, you know, some of them are scored, some of them are a lot more expensive as well, but some of them are scored much higher than projects that are funded. So I think, you know, when we do have a discussion with the FAB as far as, you know, maybe trying to prioritize some of those and putting them in, I think some of that background is going to be very important for the FAB to be able to understand and be able to bring to us a good list and what they would like to see.
Certainly.
So I just wanted to get one point of clarification before we move forward off of the CIP discussion. So typically when we talk about prioritizing CIP projects, we do that during the CIP process because we are kind of churning and recombobulating, for lack of a better term, the whole 5-year program. And right now at the proposed budget time, we're really looking at that first year column and trying not to totally reinvent the CIP. So I just want to make sure that I have the direction correct. You want them to look at the current year's CIP projects or the entire 5-year CIP?
Me or the mayor? So me, I don't want to reinvent the what we've already done. And I fully understand. This question would have probably been a much better question for that meeting instead of, having it now. But no, I do not want to reinvent the CIP. I think if the mayor wants some of those projects to be reviewed and see if what we could bring up, or would like the FAB to review those to see what they would like to see, how they would like to see them prioritized. And I would say focus on whatever's in this year's budget.
Pretty much exactly what you just said. Sorry about the phone. Any other questions or input from the commission? Any questions or input from the Finance Advisory Board?
And I've got one other question for Henry. When we discussed the new pay plan, obviously that's quite a big change from where we are currently to where we're trying to go this next fiscal year. Is there any way that we can kind of see or I'd like to see a comparison from where we were to where we're going, or where we are currently to where we're going? Is that possible?
Yes. Now, could you be a little more specific as to what you're looking for? Did you mean on individual positions or the total cost?
Well, let's look at, looking at page 250 of the budget, you have the pay plan effective October 1, 2020. And it goes through the salary schedule from everything from elected, executive management, senior management, down to supervisory. And I know some of those roles have been changed as well. Sure. So I don't expect it to be completely apples to apples, but just kind of I know we have to know what we're currently paying people. And if we could try to I personally would just like to see a comparison from where we are in these positions to where they're going to be, just so we can have a kind of an idea. Because if you look at some of the budgets, there were some very large increases in operational costs, and I'm assuming that those large increases are a good portion of that would have been because of this pay plan. For some of the operational costs, are up to $300,000 from last year to this year for some smaller departments. I completely understand, agree with it. I just would like to see what that difference is.
Oh, absolutely. We can do that. We have that information, and you'll eventually get a copy of the report that shows all the positions and how they're moving and from the existing pay plan to a new pay plan. Yes.
All right, that's great. Thank you.
So the last thing on the agenda is discussion of any city commission desired budget changes. So does anybody have any desired changes?
I don't have anything right now. I think I'd like to have a little bit more discussion, maybe with the city manager, police chief, maybe Merity, in regards to the crime analyst position. And then maybe, have some discussion about that at our next, whenever we do have final approval for this or a next discussion on the budget, but nothing that I'd like to change currently.
All right, thank you.
I'd like them to show more revenue coming in.
Great.
Well,
any other great suggestions?
Along Curtis Holmes' suggestion there, Henry, do you feel like we're getting a fair shake now on the EMS reimbursement funding?
Yes, with maybe one minor exception. This year, we submitted a request that Squad 38 be funded by the county as an EMS unit. That is the only, what the county calls contractor funded unit that we currently have in the EMS system. We were very high on the ranking within the county to receive funding, but because of the current economic environment, they made the decision not to fund any enhancements to the system. So while I think we're deserving of that funding, I also understand that what they did was they treated everybody equally in the sense they didn't add any additional funding. So I think it's fair for in the context of the current economic environment, that was the appropriate thing for them to do. We'll be back again next year asking for it.
So I think it's back to Will, I believe.
Okay, thank you. I did want to just take a minute to go over our next steps in the budget process. First and foremost, I want to take the opportunity to let everyone here know and anybody watching, we're going to be doing 5 Zoom public engagement meetings over the month of July. So would encourage you to direct friends, neighbors, coworkers to our website and our social media channels where we'll be putting that information out where folks can sign up. And we'll be having some facilitated discussions around the proposed budget and the city strategic plan and strategic priorities to get feedback to see if this proposed budget is in alignment. And then we'll also show them our balancing act budget engagement tool and send them home with some homework to maybe try that out and submit their ideas. That's something that can be found on our website on largo.com/financial center, where folks can balance the budget themselves. Our Citizens Academy participants do this, and I believe we've done it with the Finance Advisory Board as well. But we're hoping to use that in these Zoom meetings as a way to generate some additional broader feedback on the budget process this year. We also engaged our community ambassadors, Youth Leadership Council, Teen Library Council, and prior year Citizens Academy participants to help us try and invite neighbors, friends, family members to these meetings. So using those folks who've been through this process before to help spread the word and make sure we get a good broad cross-section of our community. Upcoming public meetings that we're going to be having in addition to those are the trim hearing we talked about on July 21st. Then we will be having the Finance Advisory Board meeting on July 27th at 6 p.m. to discuss the budget. And then we'll have the second City Commission work session on August 11th. That'll be our final work session for budget discussion. For our public hearings for the budget, I also just want to note that our first reading of the tax rate and the budget is going to be a special meeting on Thursday, September 3rd, because we cannot overlap with some of the other authorities who are going to be having their meetings on that Tuesday. So we'll have a special meeting Thursday, September 3rd, and then the second reading of the budget and the tax rate on Tuesday, September 15th. So between our public engagement and upcoming meetings, we hope to get more feedback and discussion as we get towards adoption later in the summer here. And with that, that's it for us.
Thank you. I look forward to it. And I would ask if any of the commission has any committee reports that can't wait until Tuesday. Go ahead and let me know.
I've got one.
Okay.
Sun Coast League of Cities is a virtual planning retreat tomorrow. Right,
Nice.
James? Right, Commissioner Robinson?
Yes, it is. It's tomorrow. I don't know, man. Why you gotta put me on the spot? Yes, it is tomorrow.
9:30 to 11.
That's exactly it. Yes.
Okay, gotcha. That's it.
Perfect. Anybody else? Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for the folks from the Finance Advisory Board that joined with us today. And thank you in advance for the work that you're going to put into to giving us some advice. And thank you, of course, to the team that put this budget document together. It's you know, as much as budget documents are budget documents, it's very readable and it's very very user friendly. So I certainly appreciate the work that's been put into it. So unless anybody has something else to add, meeting is adjourned, and have a great weekend. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.